Hello and welcome back. So to continue our protection from SQL injection, we have to look at how to use prepared statements. So what exactly are prepared statements? So if I go back to my code here, you can download this code obviously in the description if you want to type along. So a prepared statement, let's say here where we have queries like this. So on this class, for example, I have this query that says select all from posts. So what a prepared statement does is that instead of having, let me see one that has an ID. For example, instead of having this ID, because this ID here is part of the query, it will be evaluated here before being supplied to the query. So there will be an actual number here, the ID, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, for example. And so the problem is, in a situation like this, it's possible to mix the values with the query itself. So what prepared statements do is they put placeholders here, like variables, and then you supply like this ID here, you supply it separately, then it will be added to the query afterwards. So this helps to completely stop SQL injection. There's no possibility. It cuts it down to completely zero possibility of having SQL injection in a situation like that. So let's see how we can go about doing this. Now, the beauty of a system where there's only a single entry point is that if I change this function dbRead over here, it means I have changed every single instance of where I'm reading from the database in my entire website. So this is the beauty of a system like this. Also, when I change the dbWrite, it means I have changed every instance where I'm interacting with the database. So hopefully you can appreciate the value of a system like this. So let's begin converting this to PDO. Now, I did mention that we are doing prepared statements, right? Now, there's a system called PDO. This one stands for PHP Data Objects, PHP Data Objects. So this is one way of connecting to a database. This MySQLi Connect is one way, but I prefer PDO because it's easier when you're working with prepared statements. Now, you can use prepared statements using MySQLi like this. It can be done, no problem. However, I'd much rather use PDO like this because with PDO, not only can you connect to different databases using PDO, you can also use prepared statements. But MySQLi is very specific to a MySQL database. So let's see how we can connect using PDO. So here we're just going to replace a few things here. Now, for better error monitoring here, what I will do is convert this to a try catch. So I'm just going to say try like so, and then put catch on the other end like that. Okay. So this is what is known as a try catch block. So what this does is whatever code you put in here will try to run, and then if there's an error that is produced, it will skip to this part and not run the rest of the code. So here we're going to tell it that we want a PDO exception like this, and then we're going to call that exception E like so. And so if things happen don't go well, instead of having this die here, I'll put this here, right? We will die, but instead of this message here, let's give it the message that is more appropriate, which is maybe E. Now, for security reasons though, it may not be a good idea to show that error here. So you may want to check if you're on localhost and give a different error. If you are not on localhost, you're on the live server, it's better you give this error could not connect to database because it's very vague. So you could do this here and say if, as we have done before, if server name like that, server, and then you do, or you can say HTTP host, that's okay, HTTP host, like that. So if the HTTP host is equal to localhost, like so, then you can show the actual error that you want, which in this case will be, let's die with the error, which is going to be E, and then we'll say get message, like that. Okay, so that will be the message that will tell you what's wrong with your database, because sometimes this message can contain sensitive information. So you must be careful not to show it when you're on a live server, unless you want to. Then you can come back and show that. So else we show this, could not connect to database. So all this only happens if we fail to connect to our database. But in order to connect, we need to make a connection string, just like we have here. Now, instead of putting things like this, localhost, and then there's root and there's password, it's almost similar. And then there's a database here. The only difference is that database and localhost will be first. So there'll be localhost, there'll be database, then root, and then the password. So let's see how we can do that. So let's separate the two. I'll create a string, a connection string. Now I need to tell it the driver, because remember, PDO can connect many types of databases. So I'll say MySQL, that's my driver, full colon, and then put host is equal to localhost, and then semicolon, and then DB name is equal to, and then we put our DB name there. So I'm going to copy this and put it here. Okay, then I will semicolon, like that. And then to make a connection, we're just going to use this con here, same thing here, con. I'll come back here and put con, like so. Con be equal to, and then I'll say new PDO, like this. Then I will supply my string, and then here I will put root as my name and empty password, like that. So put your correct credentials, the same ones you were using here, put them there. And that's it. That's how you make a connection. So we don't need this anymore, but we need the return con, so we'll leave that there. So now we have converted to PDO. So this is a new PDO object right there. So once we return this, then we can use it to read our database. So now here, how do we read? So the first thing we need to do is prepare the statement. So since it's prepared statement, so what I will do is I will prepare the statement. Now, obviously I'm preparing a statement, so I'll call it statement. But I'll do this, shortcut it like that, is equal to con. And then let's do that. Now, the reason we're doing that, we're using objects here because we created a new object like that. So that's why we're using object notation here, and we'll say prepare, like so. So what are we preparing here? We're preparing the query itself, like that. Okay. So we've created a statement with a query prepared. So now keep in mind that this query doesn't have variables yet. It just has the bare query with placeholders for the data, the actual variable. So we need a way to supply those variables separately. So here we're going to put one more variable here, which is we're going to call it data, which will contain the data that is part of the query. Okay, so in this case, let me give an example. Let's say we say select all, we'll say select all from users where ID is equal to, now instead of putting an actual ID, we'll put a full colon and say ID, like this. So this is how the query is going to be. Then you can put more, like say ID is equal to ID, or maybe views is greater than, and then you put views, like so. So these are not actual variables. So what will happen is we'll supply this query here and prepare it. So it's going to be prepared and wait for actual variables to be added here. Now we need a way to give it these variables using an array. So this is going to be the array. It's going to contain these variables there. So it's going to be like, for example, here, data is going to contain one variable called, one location there called ID, and it's going to contain another one which will be called views. And so once you supply this data here, it's going to assign them depending on the ID there, and know that, okay, so the data involved in here should go there, the data involved in there should go there, and then that's how it works. So in such a way, it knows this is data and the rest of it is a query. Now, there are some times when you're running a query that doesn't have variables. So you can say something like select all from users, and you want everything. So there's no where clause here like here, and so there are no variables. So in such a case, you don't need to provide an array for variables. So we have to account for a situation like this also. This is why on data, we're going to make data optional and put an equal sign to an empty array like this. So what we're doing here, we're telling it it's okay if we don't supply anything. We're just going to default to an empty array. Great. So let's continue here. So now once we prepare the query, it's ready for consumption. So we can grab this statement here, and it's a good idea to check if the statement is true. So we're just going to say if statement, because it's very possible that it won't work out if the query, there's something wrong with the query itself. So we're going to do this and say if statement like this. Then we'll do something like this where we actually read from the database. So at this point, we will do an execute. So I'm just going to say, we're going to call this one check like this, just to check if it will run or something. So statement execute like so, and put data. Oh, sorry. Oh yes, data like that. So during the execution here, we're going to supply any data that came with it so that it will replace the query variables with the correct data on its own. So if in your case you didn't supply any data, you can leave this part out, but we are anticipating that we may put some data. So whether there's data or not, this will be an empty array if there's nothing, and if there's something, there will be something there. So it's clever enough to know when to use that data and when not to. So we just do the check there. If things go well, then it means a result was returned. So we say if check like so. So things went well. So now let's read from the database. So since we are reading, we're expecting a result. So at this point, I can do a result is equal to, and then here I will say statement again and say fetch all like so. Okay, so that's how we get all the data from there. But the thing is, this result can either be false, it can either be an array that is empty, or it can be an array that contains data. So we only want to read from this when it's an array that contains data. So we will put an if statement here and say if is array, that's number one. That's a result. If the result is an array and the number of items in the array is greater than 0. So if count is greater than 0, like so. Okay, so if all those are true, then we're going to return the result. So here we'll say return result, like that. Now here, if you do it like this, it's going to return an associative array, and it's going to return 2 arrays for each result, which sometimes can make the data too big. So here what we will do is tell it what we want to get, and we'll say PDO fetch obj. So you can either fetch objects or you can fetch arrays, associative arrays like that. So let me see here what we were getting. We were getting arrays. We were getting an associative array. So we're going to maintain that with assoc. And then that's return. That's it. So if anything doesn't work out, we return false. So the rest of it, this is irrelevant. So I'll remove this. Save there. So this is our new thing. So what I'll do here is copy everything from here, because it's pretty much the same as here. Just like we're doing here, we're just reading. Let me paste this here. The only difference is there's nothing to fetch. Oh, right here, there's nothing to fetch. So all this will go out. and we just return true over here, like that. Okay, anything else, we return false. So execute data. So we need the data here as well, like that. Good, and that does it. So any references to MySQL query should be removed because we're no longer using that. So I can see by scrolling down here that all references have been removed successfully. So just by changing the database class here, we have successfully changed how the entire website works without having to go to any single page here to change anything. This is the beauty of using object-oriented programming. It makes things so easy to do. Okay, so let's give it a test to see if nothing is broken. So I'm going to refresh the page. And as you can see, the data comes back as intended. Okay. Here we don't have access. There we go. There we go. Home. Okay, so everything is working. And that is how you use prepared statements. So instead, let's give a live example of, let's change things. Let me go to my post here. And where is this? So you see here, we are using classes to read posts. So let's go to our post here, the class that reads posts, and we have these queries here. So let's see which ones we can edit here for a second. So this is the only one that uses variables. The others have no need for variables here. So everything remains as it is. But for this one, where we get one post, things will be different. So here what we will do is, let me go to ID here. Instead of supplying the ID here, we'll remove the quotes and just put ID like so. Okay, that's enough. And then what we do is we create an array. So let me, I'll create the array here. So just say ARR is equal to empty array. And then I'm just going to add things to this array. So here, I'll copy this and put it here. So instead of putting this inside a variable like that, I'll put this inside an array like so. So this value in this array is equal to int. So I have one item in this array and all I need is to supply it here like that. Now, if I don't do this, what I will get is this. Let me undo there. If I don't add the array, but I put a placeholder there, it's going to tell me there's an error in your syntax. So let me click here to go to one post. So you see, this is the error I get. It says syntax error. You have an error in your SQL syntax. But if I put the array here, this will go because this is considered a syntax error if I don't have an array to back it up. So let me come back here and refresh. You see that now it works just fine. Also, if I put too many items here, let's say I put more values here and say views is equal to, and then I say views. Meanwhile, I haven't added the views variable here, so there's only one variable here, but there are two in the query. So what will happen here is it will tell me that invalid parameter number, the number of bound variables does not match the tokens. So when you see this error, just know that this number here of variables does not match the number of variables in the array. Those are pretty much the errors you are most likely to get in a situation like this. But if we solve that, everything is back to normal. So let's do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to copy this array part there. Let's do the same thing when we are reading for email and here. Okay, so quite all right, we have email here. So I will do this instead, remove that, and then add password, and I will change that to a full colon and close that. Good. Now, as usual, I have to supply an array to have that data. So instead of putting this inside email and password, I will put it inside an array. So I'll use array. I'll do this ARR like this and do that. So now they're going inside an array, and then I can put that array here. like that. So I know this will work, no problem. And let's go and do this somewhere else. There's also this one, get profile. So I did add a profile page in case you haven't noticed, but we'll talk about that in the next video. So here, same thing. I'm going to put array like that, and then change that as well, and then put the array here. Awesome. I think that does it. That's all the places that we are reading from the database. So hopefully you have learned something new, and I'll see you in the next video.